Okay, good morning, everybody. This is a presentation from the American Numismatic Association. My name is Irick. I'm the ANA Exhibit Judge Certification Program Coordinator. And this will be the part one of the ANA Judge Certification Program, which is for both new exhibit judges, exhibitors that are interested in how judging works, and also for existing ANA judges desiring to take their once every 5-year required recertification. From a background standpoint, I've been a collector for over 50 years, an exhibitor for over 15, and current elected Vice President of Central States Numismatic Society and an area director in Canada. We're going to spend about 45 minutes going through the different elements of judging and the different benefits of being a judge, including increasing your numismatic knowledge. So the first 5 things is why judge? Well, one, just by the act of reading exhibits, you increase your knowledge, sometimes by reading your exhibit because you find problems, which also forces you to become a better exhibitor. It's a service to the hobby because perhaps only 1 or 2% of us are engaged enough to want to even attempt to judge exhibits, and it's a very traditional part of our hobby. There's a camaraderie. I know most of you by name, and there's probably about 115 to 120 active judges in this country, and another 20 or so in Canada. We still receive a judge's medal, which is of nominal value, and at most ANA conventions we also receive a photo ID, which gives us before and after general public access to the board sport. And the World Fair of Money Banquet is now gone up, I believe, to $50 from $25 or 50% of the total price, but that's still a bargain to get a banquet ticket. Talk about the best exhibit judges. They're ethical, they're emphatic, they are willing to communicate with exhibitors that have questions. They certainly know the rules, so most of them have been in the game for a long time. They're open to opinions, especially when you have your judges conference, and making corrections when especially a judge notices something, researches it, and is able to tell the other 2 judges that you typically work with at the NA what the issue is. They would also have advanced knowledge in numismatics in 1 or more areas, usually they're a specialist, and they know how to read every word in every case. We'll get back to that, but you read every word in every case. Next. The judge's tools are pretty straightforward. The first thing you're going to do is have a rating sheet, and you got to make sure this is a pencil. For right now, I don't have a pencil with me, but this is a pencil. And you also have your judge's spreadsheet. And you put it on a clipboard. And typically what I'll do is I won't have my worksheets like this. I'll have them with the judging sheet where I write comments, and it's important to write comments, especially if you're giving low scores on something, to give the exhibitor feedback on how to improve their exhibit. And you don't initially write your scores down here until you've had your judges conference. What you do is when you're ready to put points on an exhibit, you flip this back when you have privacy, and you write your notes down. You flip this back. That way you keep what should be private, because you never know if you're getting an exhibitor or a visitor working over your shoulder. I noticed a couple of you today were doing it in the opposite way. This is what the ANA currently recommends as a best practice. Okay, the odds of being certified. It's open to everybody. I certified on my first try with limited exhibiting experience, but with pretty good knowledge. I display historic vehicles, so I know what the judging looks like for that process. This is very similar, except less complicated. They've never exhibited competitively, low odds. Past regional exhibitor, much better, usually very good, especially if they inspire themselves to take this class. And if you're past national exhibitor, generally extremely good. Usually get about an 80% success rate. Okay, now we're gonna talk about the judging process. First thing you're gonna do is, without your paperwork, you're gonna walk around and take a look at all the exhibits you're going to judge. Get a mind's eye view of what they are, make sure you found all of them, enjoy them like the public would. You'll start getting your mind ready for how you want to judge them, in which order, which ones you're going to need to do a little bit of research on, but just take the time to enjoy it. Usually if I have an assignment, I'll look at them the night before and say, okay, this is the amount of work I'm going to have to put into getting this assignment done, because that's the other thing is time management. We usually have a fairly limited amount of time to get to the conference. Let your eyes look at anything that becomes of special interest to you, either good or bad. And again, enjoy them. Then, we're going to carefully read each exhibit, and we're going to read every word. We strongly encourage you to write comments on the sheets, good or bad, or an overall comment like outstanding exhibit, hard to improve. When you get to the very best, it kind of validates the work that the exhibitor did. Apprentices are required to write comments for every single criteria. It's not optional for them, because that way myself and usually Chief Exhibit Judge Bowling or Bob Russell in Florida and a couple other people that I use for the second person, we can read the comments and make sure that they got to the score in an appropriate way. Sometimes they notice stuff that the floor judges didn't score more harshly. We don't assign scores unless it's really obvious at this point. We get done reading the whole exhibit first. If you're an apprentice, you're not allowed to consult with anybody other than how the rules work. You're not allowed to ask how many points should this score, but you are allowed to consult any type of research material or subject matter experts to come up with your opinion on what it should grade. You're not allowed to consult with other apprentices or judges on consensus of what the score should be, because that wouldn't be fair to the certification project. Then we're going to go back over the exhibit one more time, and given the comments you made the first time through, take a look at those areas that were either extremely good or caused you concern, make sure that you come to the same conclusion a second time. At this point, you get that spreadsheet out by flipping over the top page. You can pencil in the comments, make sure you get them in the right column, because that has happened in the past. I've done it myself. You can mark the sheet up if you got to change the exhibit name, so you don't have to do the erasures. Now, there's two sides of this sheet of paper, so if you got some extensive comments to make, say see back and write them on the back. That way you're not trying to crowd yourself, especially if you got bigger handwriting, because there's different sizes all the way from extremely small to fairly good sized. As long as you can read it, it helps. Now, normally the titles are entered as you see them when you work that class left to right, but that's not critical. Some organizations do it in sequential number of the order of receipt of the application, but the cases may not be in that order just because of space management. Okay, after you've put down provisional scores for every exhibit, then and only then should you get a calculator, do it the old-fashioned way, manually add up the scores. We don't do this until we've read every exhibit because, unfortunately, by starting to assign scores before you've read everything, it introduces a risk of a bias. Even if you're extremely honorable, sometimes you get surprised that the exhibit you thought was really good is a couple points off and something slightly better because of how the different elements ended up scoring on total. And if the score doesn't meet your overall sense, then go back and look at the exhibits that you think should have come out differently and try to validate whether you got to the right answer or you need to make a little bit of adjustment. It's completely acceptable to go back to an exhibit more than once. I've gone back 3 or 4 times in some cases. And then, especially if you're judging a lot of exhibits, before you consult with the other judges in your class, break any ties you have to at least 5 places. That means you might have to go up or down a little bit. The classic example of where that's extremely important is central states in the miscellaneous category. In the miscellaneous category, there's typically 10 to 12 exhibits. I remember judging that class one time when I had 16, and the top 7 exhibits were all within a point of each other when I got done with the judging, and it took 2 hours to do the judges' conference because they were that tightly spaced. Now, after you get done doing your conference with the other judges and you agree on an order of finish, then and only then do you transfer the scores to the sheets, which will be going back to the exhibitors as a package. And then it's optional, but a good judge signs it. And sometimes if I want to talk to the exhibitor, I'll leave my mobile phone number and say, well, you know, I'd like to discuss this with you. I think I can help you. A really great judge always provides that service, especially if they're not that busy at a convention, or if they're too busy and they don't have time to speak right at the convention. Having a phone call afterwards sometimes is very helpful to solidify a good friendship. This is where you use ink, because exhibitors don't like seeing penciled in scores. And they don't like seeing changes, so be very careful that when you transfer the scores from the spreadsheet to this, you get the right column filled in here. Okay, this has been an area where subject to a lot of debate and a lot of time has been spent in the discussing the matter both by email and in the ANA exhibit committee. Typical score ranges to start getting into a 3rd place at a regional show. You're probably going to need about 70 points for a weak 3rd place, but closer to 80 to get a good 3rd place shot or a 2nd place shot. By the time you get up into the high 80s, you're looking at 1st or 2nd place, except for the most competitive areas. By the time you're in the low 90s, you're almost guaranteed of a 1st place because that doesn't happen very often. High 95, really high scores over 95 usually are looking at a Best of Show award, even at the ANA. There's only been about 6 or 7 of those that I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years. Now, incredibly intense competition. Probably the most fiercely contested is U.S. paper money. There's 4 or 5 really good exhibitors in that field, and they have really good stuff, and they know how to exhibit. So it's always interesting to go to a major show and watch them exhibit and try to figure out which one's going to win. Now, before we go into the rating elements, there's a sheet of paper that is Bowling's notes on why judges should consult. It's 2-sided. Basically, about 40 years ago, Joe Bowling and Fred Schwann were basically heads up in a class at a convention. And my recollection is Joe got the first place but had fewer total points than Fred. So when you get all done, when you look at your order of merit, make sure that the sum of your 3 scores also reflects that order of merit, because otherwise it's really hard to explain. It doesn't happen often, but I do see it when I work as a chief judge about once every 2 years, where a floor team hasn't gotten that quite right. A good chief judge will get the judges back together to get that situation resolved before we give back the judges' sheets. Okay, now if you go back to your judge's spreadsheet, there will be a column of numbers that shows the start point where you should start thinking an average exhibit should be. And that's the start point, the second number. The first number is the maximum points for that criteria. So for title and scope, we start at 4 points and work our way up and down. For the first 7 elements, that's how those elements will be rated. You get to this start point, you make an opinion of whether it's above average or not, why, and score it accordingly. So one of the things is that obvious and well placed. I had a hard time finding a title a couple of years ago because it was in really small print in the second case. Should be in the first case, somewhere near the top, hopefully. And if necessary, is there a further explanation of the scope of the exhibit? So very typical first paragraph words are, the purpose of this exhibit is to. Or in one case here, the exhibitor is defined a noun. You know, and you can be a little bit creative here, but if it's a solid, nice job, you give it a 5. If it's average, you give it a 4. If there's problems, including spelling mistakes, then you might be able to knock it down to a 3, and I have seen spelling mistakes. Or the scope doesn't match the title. But if you do go below any of the start points, we ask you to write comments down to explain why you didn't think it worked, because that way they can go improve their exhibit. A lot of people will bring an exhibit here to this show to develop it, to take it to Florida, which is in one of the larger fields, and that's coming up in January. It doesn't sound like long, but 6 weeks from now you have to have it ready to go in an improved format. It takes time. Now, if we have any apprentices for a new judging class, or classification, or brand new judge, they have to write comments for everything. We'll keep reminding you. When I see the apprentices working, I do go check to see if they're doing just exactly that, because I hate seeing them think they're done and then have to go back and work 3 or 4 more hours. So for each of these, we'll have some comments, like this one, positive comments are in white, intriguing title. And we've already talked about the purpose isn't clear from the title. And then another example is you got the title and the scope, but the transition into the numismatic information isn't well done. It's a writing skill. Or it's too small, physically. Next category, and I'll say the first 7 categories, which amount to 70 points, are all about how well you present the material. And then the last 3 are how difficult, or around condition, difficulty, and rarity. What's the quality of the material look like? So in basic numismatic information, we take a look for specifications of the numismatic items. Is there enough information there that would normally be expected for the type of material it is? And it varies depending on tokens, metals, coins, paper money, numismatic books. And it doesn't have to be overblown. Is it enough to fit the scope of the exhibit? So you don't need to tell us what type of paper they used and the changes on national currency because of World War I, or later changes to save money. And doesn't answer the likely questions an exhibitor might have. It goes, doesn't go into some detail, especially if it's not their specialty. So mintage, printing plant, composition, sizes, what type of technology got used. Sometimes, strangely, very old technologies got used long after they should have been. The designer engraver, variety identification. It's like if you're showing bust half dollars and their varieties, usually it's a good idea to have the Overton number written down because people that specialize in that know these coins better by their Overton number. Banknotes would be a Friedberg number. And then world coins, usually you put down a Krause-Nellis number. We start with 12 points on this element, and if they do an extremely efficient job laying out the information well, they could get as high as 15 points, but usually 14 is about as high as you normally get. We go below 12, provide some feedback. So, who designed the metals? How many state quarters are minted? You could resolve that by just saying these are all made in the hundreds of millions and are very common. That you don't have to make an exhaustive listing. You can cover it in one sentence. That's efficient. We talked about Overton varieties. They didn't identify it. Giving the weight of each stage of a die progression, unless the exhibit scope is about it, isn't important. And then on banknotes, what type of signature is it? Is it hand or machine, rubber stamp? The exemplary comment is this is hand signed when ordinarily they're not. This must have been a presentation note of some sort. It happens. Then we get into special numismatic information, which kind of gets into the era when the stuff was made and the events that were going on around the same time, or other information that's pertinent to the material. But basically, you want to try to provide a link to the numismatic material and the extra information that you're presenting. A lot of times it's very interesting. Historic backgrounds, biographic, something about the people that were involved in them, political, religious, geographic, economic conditions. And the last one, which is really important, is bibliographic or reference information. Generally, you'll find a bibliography in somewhere on the right side of the last case of the exhibit, giving the resources cited. And you can take a look at that to see if it's whole hum, 2 or 3 just really normal ones, or whether the exhibitor put some extra effort in and came up with some not so common references, or perhaps new ones that they hadn't seen before. Reward that. It's worth a point or two to do a good job on your references, even if you're referring to something you see as an internet website. Again, we start with 12 and we write comments under 12. So the one was history of the Koig catalog, which was the 1860 first major auction in this country. Somebody had that as a major exhibit, and they gave the history. Great background of the life of Wright. I think we're talking about the architect. There was no references about the coins. They displayed encased postage, but didn't say why it was made in the first place, because that was an expensive way to make money. And why did the Franklin half-dollar series end so quickly? Normally it lasts at least 25 years. When we know that was the death of Kennedy, right? And the other fact you could put in is because people hoarded the Kennedy halves and vending machines were becoming more common. That was the last time a half-dollar circulated in this country. Well, they still make them. It's primarily for collectors. So moving out of the story time frame, creativity and originality. This is one where we made some updates in the judging standards. So the exhibit novel or creative, we've added the word concept, content, design or presentation, but the exhibit committee agreed that we should reward somebody that comes up with an imaginative new topic, one of which was exploder tokens. That was done by a young lady that lives in Michigan a few years ago. The exploder tokens are those tokens that a mining blaster or pyrotechnician would use to get their supplies. Things like drill rods, dynamite, gunpowder, fuses, and even the carbide for their lamp. And shockingly, they were a lot more common than I'd ever thought. I was really wowed by that exhibit. So here we start with 7 points, and we add points if the imagination of the exhibit wows you. And you write comments below 6. Now, some of the presentation could be, are they using the fact that the case is 3D, or is everything just laying in the bottom? I like to see people use space. Are they using prisms or mirrors so you can see both sides of the object? That's fairly hard to, it's fairly hard to actually engineer something like that. And, one of the prism exhibits is here, and one of the mirror exhibits is here. That takes extra work. That should get rewarded in creativity and originality. So, Explorer token, great idea for an exhibit. One of the paper money exhibits that's pretty well run its course. The guy had trains running through his cases with tunnel entrances at each end. Here's one about using the different horizontal levels in the case to make it make a little more pop. Novel way to show the reverses of your coins. The first person that did prisms got that comment. He lives up in Washington, or no, excuse me, in the state of Oregon. But a negative comment here, where you give a 7 or a 6, typical or average. That gets the whole job done. The exhibitor knows it. The next item is attractiveness. This has to do with how easy is it to look at the exhibit? Is it neat, well-designed, eye-catching, not faded or dingy from repeated display? That happens when the stuff starts to get damaged during transit. Relief is granted if the exhibit area chair is made aware of the fact it got damaged in transit, and they tell the 3 judges this area of the exhibit got damaged and couldn't be fixed. We do grant relief on that at this point. It's not fair to the exhibitor that had misfortune in transit. Are the color schemes pleasing and effective? And most importantly, are their title and text easy to read? There was an exhibit a while back that wore me out and wore Joe Bowling out because they used 10-point font throughout, and there was a lot of text. It was punishing just to read the thing, and it took a hit in attractiveness. It should aspire for 12 to 14 at the very least, and 16 is even better if you don't need a lot of words. So you can go out here and take a look. I didn't see any microtext this time because I think people have listened, but there are some people that still are a little bit pushy and not getting it quite big enough. Spelling and grammar are to be addressed here. A lot of times in the past it was addressed in basic and special numismatic information, but that caused more scatter in the judges' scores, made it more difficult to certify judges, made it more difficult to have a consultation. So we've now said spelling and grammar goes here. That's where it truly belongs. Now, on the pleasing and effective, if the intent is to cause something to look annoying, that should be rewarded in creativity and originality and not docked here. There's an exhibit called Byzantine Chaos, which discussed the coinage of the Byzantine era and how chaotic the time frame was. So the guy intentionally came up with a color scheme that you had basically to put sunglasses on to look at. That was still attractive because it was his intent to do it that way. Plus, you got a bonus point or two for creativity. Deservedly. We start with 8 points for a neat, well-displayed exhibit and work our way up or down accordingly. Colors are stunning. Description cards stand out really well in the frames. Thanks for easy to read text. Uneven cutting, colors clash. Font description cards are too small, and dingy appearance are also appropriate comments if you get below that start point. Finally, balance, which is next to last category, that's around how well is it presented. Do the numismatic items, information, and related materials receive appropriate space and attention compared to the bonus stuff that somebody might add that puts a historical context on it? Generally, I'm looking for 60 to 70% of it to be numismatic material, and the other 30%, how do I put the person in the right frame of mind or give them advice about what was going on during and after the period of time the objects were made. It's a delicate art. In no way does it have to do with creativity and originality. And part of it is there enough text to deal with this numismatic material that is displayed? And again, balance has no relationship to the actual layout of the material. If you find that somebody isn't using space efficiently, a couple of their cases, and they got two areas that are crowded, and it's easy for you to ascertain they could have made better use of the space, that should be taken care of in attractiveness, and that's worth a point or two. It happens. So we start with 8 points and go up or down from there. A good comment is, the text met my needs. Second one is too much text. If you wear out a judge trying to read an exhibit, you're not going to do well. Somebody displayed ANA badges, convention badges, and didn't describe what each one was. Photos aren't related to the story. There was one exhibit that came in that had a couple World War II pictures in it that had no relationship to what was being displayed. It was just because his father had taken them, or grandfather had taken them during the World War II battle, but not near where the Sydney Mint was located. And when Joe and I got involved in it, didn't even have the right dates for the battle. So just, the one problem led to a second deduction. The title and introduction didn't prepare me for what you showed me. The next one, which should be the easiest category to get all 5 points, is completeness. Because when you write your exhibit, in your introduction you say the purpose of this exhibit is to display a selection of. That gets the whole job done, because that doesn't mean you want to display a whole set. And then we do make absences for allowances of missing material. So somebody shows us Liberty nickels, makes a statement that the 1913 is beyond my economic means. That's perfectly acceptable. But the other way around that one for completeness is, say, a complete circulation date and mint mark set. That gets to completeness without having to say I can't afford the 1913. But especially on junior exhibits, we give allowances for that as they make the statement. This is, better coins are beyond my means. We start with 5 points and deduct as many points as we feel are necessary. And we rate comments scoring under 4. Well done. Thanks for the photos of the missing pieces. Perfectly matches the scope. Roman coins too broad for something on 10 Caesars. Common coins missing. Where are the copper pieces? The real one that happened a few years ago was somebody put a exhibit together, and their title and their scope statement indicated that they were going to display a complete typeset of Mexico circulating coins of the 20th century. The only problem was he didn't include the gold coins, which were struck for circulation and still are. They just don't get used. But in the early part of the 20th century, they most certainly got used, especially in remote areas where they didn't trust the banking system. That cost them a few points. The only thing he would have had to do to get his 5 points instead of 4 or 3 was to say non-gold circulating coins of the 20th century, and he would have had it nailed, because it was a really nice exhibit. You know, honestly, when we talked to him afterwards, he asked a question. He said, you know, I thought about it, and he said, I never really even thought about that fact. He learned something. Okay, so we're done with the 70 points relating to how you present your material. Now we're into the 30 points, which is dedication to collecting, coming up with something that's rare and unusual to look at. A good exhibitor that wants to get to a Best of Show award, particularly at the ANA World's Fair of Money, the Fun Show, or Michigan, generally will come up with an idea where they can get most of these 30 points. These are 10-point elements, and if you notice, the start points for all 3 of these are 1. And there's a guidance sheet that I passed out outlining how these are to be scored, because this had there's a great deal of discussion, because this is the area where there's a great deal of scatter in judging, which was affecting results, and also causing Joe Bowling and I to receive considerable judging protests at ANA shows, because there is a period of protest once they get their sheets back, and the exhibitor generally knows what they should score. Yeah, on the last 3 categories, the start point's a 1. So this 2-page piece of paper good chief judges like Tom has been passing this out with the judges packet, but try to bring it with you if you don't, because it explains exactly how you should be judging this. And it was voted on and it was unanimously passed. There is still some grumbling going on, but it was the most fair thing we could come up with. So the first item is degree of difficulty, 10 points. Does the exhibit show dedication to collecting? In that the material, the numismatic material or the related information is difficult to assemble or present. Examples, as stated on the judge's sheet, multiple rare pieces, new research, which is really important. A collection that took years to assemble. A lot of times the exhibitor makes the statement, and usually we got a pretty good idea, but since we specialize in the area, yeah, they're right, that took a long time, a lifetime of work, right? So, these are exemplary comments. The top 3 are the types of comments you put down when somebody really pounded one out of the park. The bottom, it's acceptable to put down that these are 6 relatively available tokens. The exhibitor usually knows it, but write it down that way. It validates the score you give. Score 3 on this isn't unheard of. Franklin Mint material is purchased as a set. Yeah, the mintage is low, but you can go out on the boards in most areas or call somebody and you can get whatever you want from the Franklin Mint. Or it can be collected at one show. One of the exhibits I do is U.S. gold coins. And the exemplary comment was, it's like with the right checkbook, you could buy the entire exhibit at any show or major auction. And the person's right, and it didn't deserve much degree of difficulty. Because it's not the amount of money you put into it, it's how hard is it to put it together. So, scores of 1 to 3, everything's common, no new research. 4 to 6, there may be some multiple rare pieces, and some pretty common pieces with good new research. You know, we talked about the decades of work. You get into 7 or 8, but then you got the added degree of difficulty of multiple rare or very rare pieces. R8 or up for the scale that's on the rarity criteria. And new discoveries and new research. And then 9s and 10s, multiple rare and very rare items, some of which may be unique or one known. R10, the exhibit also includes new research from an intermediate to a very high level. And usually you can tell which exhibits those are, because even as a specialist, if you see the exhibit for the first time, you learn something you've never seen before. Now, when an exhibit has fortuitous finds, they don't get extra credit in the degree of the difficulty. But the exception of this is new research or research by an exhibitor leading to a find. In one case, an exhibitor in Michigan showed a single banknote that was signed by continental currency signed by Joshua Barney, U.S. Navy hero. It was his belief that the note should exist if he signed the notes. It took him 25 years to find one. He finally found one. He displayed it. It got a very high degree of difficulty score because he explained the story very nicely. The other one is Joe Bowling's favorite example. I think it was an 1807 dime that was bent, pulled, and used after it was bent. But it was a new, the person exhibited determined it was an undocumented die pair. So it was one known, and he did the research and determined that it was one known. Probably didn't pay much money for it, but he got a great piece out of it. The next one we want to look at is average condition of the material in the exhibit. Is it the best that's reasonably available? Now, especially national banknotes and some foreign currency, the exhibitor may make a statement somewhere in the introduction that stuff got used really hard and there weren't any collectors, so anything above, say, very fine is exceptionally high quality. You can always go to the national banknote census or other censuses to validate that if you're in tight competition, but the exhibitor is usually pretty honest about what's out there. Now, the one exception on condition, well, there's two. One is somebody intentionally shows something to show what the average condition of something looked like, to demonstrate the difference between what they're displaying and what most of it looked like by the time it was ready for redemption. The other one is if somebody's doing a progression set of low grade to extremely high grade for the same denomination. One example of that is there is an exhibit on US $3 gold coins. And he goes all the way from poor 1 to something like mint state 66. That should get, as long as it grades on the slabs roughly match what you think the coin actually is, honor it with a 10 because that was the guy's scope. And there's strong agreement on that point. Again, we start with 1 point. Most of the scores are going to be in the 5 to 8. If you go less than 6, it's a good idea to write comment. Here's some exemplary comments. One was damaged pieces should be upgraded. Significant wear copper coins covered with verdigris or gunk, hopefully not green. Condition should take in the average of what's in the exhibit. That's reasonably available. So, so if there's a rare, very rare piece, they're judged as a VF, but it's the only piece known, it should average in with the rest of the material as a 10 because it is the best of what's out there. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, likewise, if there's a population of 2, that's still a 7 or 8 for the same reasons. And again, we'll see statements by the exhibitor how difficult it is to find this stuff. And this is the exception we talked about. Environmental damage condition set. Or a wood ball set that's intentionally displayed. Shouldn't get docked here. Rarity. This criteria is around the rarity of the single rarest piece of numismatic material related to the title and scope in the exhibit. This honors somebody that manages to put an exhibit in of the 1913 Liberty nickel or some other thing where there's only one known, or potentially less than 5. That's merged in with some more common material that's also in equally high condition. We do not factor in financial value. Financial value is never a consideration for how we should score exhibits. We had run into that concern a couple of times. Those judges have been recalibrated. We start with 1 point. Write comments for less than 6. Here's exemplary comments. One case of Franklin metal was really a R3 and not an R8. Typically scores are ranged from 3 to 10 with 5 to 8 on average. Strong competition, you're going to see 9s and 10s pretty frequently. The rarity score is also very dependent on the exhibit class, like national banknotes, tokens, and metals. Typically are some very rare pieces because the miniatures were low and the save rate was equally low. Now on US coins, you could get into very rare coins because somebody's displaying a selection of very rare early coppers. Early copper varieties, very rare Overton varieties, or even early proof coins. There are a lot of possibilities there where you can still get to an 8 on even US coins. So a typical US coin exhibit rarity is going to be 3 to 6. US fiscal paper will be in the 6 to 10 range by comparison. On the sheet that I passed out, you'll see that we've agreed to use the Sheldon Rarity Scale because that's a standard scale in the hobby. And our R1 is there's greater than 5,000 known. When we get down to R10, there's 1 known, or it's unique. We know there's only 1 made. Both count as a 10. And you can see by the time you get up to 76 pieces, you're already down to a 5. So this is going to make or break potential first place or best to show in many cases. Now we have another exception in the case where the exhibitor indicates that there's 2 known but one's non-collectible because it's tied up in a museum. Score of 10 is appropriate instead of a 9 because the exhibitor made the statement, especially if he says where it is, or she. Similar upward adjustments should be made on more common material as you feel appropriate. And here, the condition of the material is not relevant at all. The bent, the Holden bent coin that I discussed, that gets a 10 because there's one known. So at this point, I'd like to take any questions that you might have.